Pakistan, well, the good news is that Pakistan has done slightly better this year in 2023's Global Gender Gap Index by scoring 142nd. I've looked into the economic survey of Pakistan report, the last one. You may have seen that 50% of the women are earning below minimum wage. So they're pushed into informal labor. They are pushed into the most vulnerable form of labor. With that should the social protection program should be linked with technical and vocational education. Addressing biases through education must be linked with women's empowerment. The other policies for women's empowerment. So it's not about investing more. It is just about better coordination.
More than almost 75% or almost 80% of them did not have any mechanisms in place that would enable them to track gender disaggregated scores, gender disaggregated data on remuneration, on employment, like very basic figures. And these are some of the leading private sector companies who have the infrastructure, who have the capability. The fact that gender equality is a cross-cutting issue, but it has failed to take the center stage that it should in policy making. And there's lack of recognition that without gender equality, multiple development goals will fail or at least suffer increasingly.
I know that I'm currently involved in many conversations by the Parliamentary Women Caucus and other institutions who are asking for more than 5%. General elections are coming up. Right now, manifestos are being revised. Right now, other amendments are being sought also. So
there's ample research which points to the fact that if there are greater women working for a company, the gender ratio is more balanced, that company tends to have a greater return on investment. Women in leadership positions tend, because of their both intellectual and emotional.
We'll be very successful in changes in the near future, unless one thing changes completely and we suddenly become a highly compliant society. The most structured employers, the most structured organizations, yes, they find women more possible. One of the things that can be done is maybe incentivizing them. There could be tax cuts. I know right now we can't afford any tax cuts and we might not be able to offer those, but there could be other incentives that could be provided.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into New Wave. My name is Norez Rana and I'm an economist with the World Bank. I'll be hosting today's program on New Wave, where we will be discussing the landscape with respect to gender equality in Pakistan. Then we'll delve a bit deeper to understand the issues that women face in terms of accessing employment and accessing business and entrepreneurial activities. We will also talk about some of the legislative action that has been taken in the last few years and what are some of the legislative gaps that tend to exist. And in the end, we will talk about some of the opportunities that can be maximized, that can be leveraged to maximize the gains associated with gender equality and development in the country. And joining me today here is a very special guest. She's Pakistan's Federal Ombudsperson for Protection Against Women at the Workplace. Previously, she was the chairperson for Punjab's Commission on the Status of Women and also headed the Ross Center for Management and Development. She has held various advisory positions and has served as board members to both public and private organizations. And I'm quite certain that there's no better person to speak on the topic than Ms. Fauzia Viqar, who's my guest for today. So thank you so much, Ms. Viqar, for joining us.
Glad to be here, Norris.
And I'm hopeful that through the course of the discussion and by the end of it, we'll have some key learnings and possibly deliberate upon some key solutions that can be leveraged to empower women in the country. And so without further ado, I'll jump right into the topic. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index, Pakistan is the 145th country out of 146 countries. And this is, to some degree, a very comprehensive index, which looks at women's educational attainment, their economic empowerment, their political participation, as well as some measures on their health and security. And given the fact that we are only above Afghanistan, a country where, unfortunately, sadly, gender equality is non-existent, is quite harrowing and even frightening for Pakistan to say so. So Wanting to start very broadly, what do you think why that is? Why are we so far behind? Why have we not been able to empower our women, enable them to be as inclusive in both public affairs, in economic activities, so on and so forth?
So, nowadays, I think Pakistan, well, the good news is that Pakistan has done slightly better this year in 2023's Global Gender Gap Index by scoring 142nd out of 146 countries. So that is, I think, since 2006, this is the first time we've inched a little bit up. Having said that, we are still, only the few countries behind us are only Afghanistan and Yemen, and countries which need to really work hard on the gender gap. Pakistan is still doing poorly, as you've just explained, and it is one of the key factors, as you've said rightly, is the economic participation and opportunity, where we rank the lowest. We are doing better on women's education, a little bit better on women's health, and considerably better on women's political empowerment. But it is the economic participation and opportunity which really drags us back. And that is linked to very many factors. The key one of them, I guess the obvious indicator being the labor force participation, we are really behind. And I think in Pakistan, women's labor force participation rank stands at just about 22% or so. As a matter of fact, we're declining in the formal labor force participation.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add to that the urban participation rate actually is 10%, and which has hovered at this number for the last 20 years, and it is one of the lowest in the world. To your point.
Absolutely, and precisely that that's what I wanted to refer to. That within that 22% also we have huge disparities, not just between urban and rural, but also provincial or regional disparities within Pakistan. So, for instance, in Balochistan, the women's labor force participation hovers around 10%, if I'm not wrong. A little over 10%, if I'm not wrong. Punjab has the highest, huge disparity between urban and rural. And then within that percentage, whatever is working also, there is gender gap disparity. There is a gender gap in terms of income. And women are concentrated in frontline, manual, extremely low paid jobs. As a matter of fact, if you have looked into the economic survey of Pakistan report, the last one, you may have seen that 50% of the women are earning below minimum wage. So they're pushed into informal labor, they are pushed into the most vulnerable form of labor, and they are pushed into the lowest paying labor. So I feel like that's an area where we need to focus our attention at. The other thing I personally feel that if Pakistan has to progress, not just for women, but for our burgeoning youth population, we have to really focus on the technical and vocational education. Because that right now is, we are far behind, and that is the need of the hour right now. And if you look at the professional and technical workers also, even in the Global Gender Gap Index, you see that Pakistan ranks at 132nd in the country, in the world, and in the region also. We are doing far worse than other countries in the region, like India and Bangladesh, which are around 121 or 124% also. Not to talk about Sri Lanka, which is of course ranks 82nd in the world. So we will not just need to focus on the labor force participation, but also on their technical and professional vocational training and work. You were trying to understand what are some of the factors. I think one of our primary problems is lack of women's role in decision making. Nebulous as it sounds, but that is at the bottom of our problem. You will see in surveys also on decision making or women's voice surveys that even things that are fundamental to women's progress, such as education and then later employment, women have very little say. And I'd like to refer to a survey that I personally led in Punjab, where 32,000 households were interviewed, and in that there was a male perception survey. which asked how men felt about their daughters and their sisters getting education. And a resounding 83% said they think that they must get education, which is very encouraging. But when the same question was flipped around to ask how they felt about women having to take permission from the men folk in their family in order to get education and employment, an even larger percentage, I think it was around 84-85%, said they must take permission from the men folk in their family or from the elders in their family.
Oh.
I feel like that is at the bottom of our problem.
So basically, the lack of agency that women tend to suffer from, and I think it stems at the household level. These are the social cultural biases which tend to perpetuate, inhibiting women from making any active decisions and being part of the economic activity or even otherwise. But I mean that's a fair point. But then organically, the next question would be that what can be done to address these biases? If that is the crux of the issue or one of the key underlying issues, then what measures can be taken? Obviously, it's not just the government's responsibility, it's the private sector's role, it's the education sector. You need to create awareness campaigns. What, in your experience, are some of the policy measures, or even not even policy measures, some actionable interventions that have been taken or that can be taken to address this issue?
I think one of the key things that is lacking in our policy as well as our interventions is we are very poorly coordinated. We can leverage good wins by linking policies with each other. For example, the social protection programs, they must be linked to girls' education. It should not be unconditional. It must be linked to girls' education. Payment to women must be linked to not just having a CNIC and a bank account, but also some sort of control over that resource also. Similarly, that needs to be linked with the social protection program should be linked with technical and vocational education. Addressing biases through education must be linked with women's empowerment, the other policies for women's empowerment. So it's not about investing more. It is just about better coordination, in my view, and I've seen that happen. Because whenever the government was able to introduce, for example, information on gender-based violence within the curriculum of institutions, there were wins from that. Automatically it translated into more questions, better redress, access to redress mechanisms. And of course, along with that, we'll have to strengthen our implementation mechanisms, the redress mechanisms. I want to definitely here mention the State Bank of Pakistan's Banking on Equality policy. It's a gender empowerment policy. It's a fairly good policy because it tackles women's empowerment through the banking sector at 4 levels. The first of them being more accounts, customized accounts for women in Pakistan across the sector. It talks about having more women who are directly interfacing on all touch points where women bank. So having more women at sales point or wherever, in the banking sector where they are interfaces. The third one is about women's leadership within the banking sector, because women's leadership or with women's place on the table automatically leads to highlighting women's issues. That's a lived reality, right? And I know that there are lots of very well-meaning men, but they still can't, they'll have to make an extra effort to understand that lived reality of women, which comes naturally to women, for which additional homeworks do not have to be done. And the final point that State Bank has talked about in that policy is collecting gender disaggregated data. Forever, Pakistan has been confronted with the lack of gender disaggregated data. You're an economist, and I know that gender disaggregated data, there's a dearth of gender disaggregated data. And data tells a story. You really do not need to convince people if there is good set of data. That's easier to convince people. Even now, we do not have national statistics on gender-based violence, let alone other key economic indicators, or economic statistics. So I feel like even if there was progress in those 4 areas, there'd be better participation on women, better financial inclusion of women, and I think better access to the various resources that at least the state offers or the financial sector offers.
I mean, you mentioned of gender disaggregated data, and I'm sure you're well aware and it won't come as a surprise to you, but there's a project that I did in Pakistan which focused on encouraging private sector firms and companies, one of the leading private sector firms and companies in Pakistan, to disclose their goals as well as their existing figures and facts related to gender equality and gender empowerment. And surprisingly, more than almost 75% or almost 80% of them did not have any mechanisms in place that would enable them to track gender disaggregated scores, gender disaggregated data on remuneration, on employment, like very basic figures. And these are some of the leading private sector companies who have the infrastructure, who have the capabilities to do so. And it does come as a surprise. And then coming back to one of your initial points where we talked about ensuring that there's greater agency for women where they can make leadership decisions, not even leadership decisions, they can make decisions for themselves. But according to the very recent Women, Business and Law report, it's another report, a flagship report of the World Bank, where they look at regulations, rules, and legislative policies that exist. For Pakistan, they identified that a woman cannot apply for a passport as the same way as a man can. And there are no provisions that very categorically prohibit discrimination of wage discrimination between men and women, and things like that, where the government can more proactively take action, but they've been, failing to do so because of the fact that probably you've been in those corridors of power. You can better divulge us, but the fact that gender equality is a cross-cutting issue, but it has failed to take the center stage that it should in policymaking. And there's lack of recognition that without gender equality, multiple development goals will fail or at least suffer increasingly.
So, Naresh, I just want to use this platform to reiterate that there are constitutional guarantees for gender equality. And those are fairly good. If you take Article 25, it's about equality of women and men, equality of citizens of Pakistan, irrespective of sex or, various other qualifiers. There is Article 34, which talks about women's active participation in public spaces. There are other articles, Article 37, for example, which talks about maternity benefits and other guarantees for women specifically. So there is a lot of de jure availability, of measures to support women's empowerment. There are specific laws, and recently I think we've had some wins in the sense that in 2017, the Companies Act, which was enacted, I'm sure you know about it, that required at least one woman on the board of directors.
Yeah.
That does bring about a lot of change, or at least it acts as a catalyst, to further conversations on towards that end. Or the Elections Act, which necessitated that political parties field women, at least 5% women on general seats also. I know that I'm currently involved in many conversations by the Parliamentary Women Caucus and other institutions who are asking for more than 5%. General elections are coming up. Right now, manifestos are being revised. Right now, other amendments are being sought also. So people are asking, why not 15%? And also the mode of election, not just about general elections, and it's just about not just about bringing women on general seats, but also bringing them on winnable seats. So that those conversations have been spurred on from those legislative enactments. My point being that the laws are generally good, and laws are a very good way of at least starting off on major social changes. I agree that, I will agree with people who say that laws alone will not make a difference, absolutely. And that social change has to start from the household, etc., etc. Yes, but sometimes catalyzing an action requires at least starting off with the legislation when social change is practically impossible. Case in point being Case in point being, the crimes which are perpetrated in the name of honor. It was sanctioned by culture and society until the law became stringent, and at least some curbs were developed, and advocacy around it became faster also. So the laws are good. Implementation is lacking, and implementation requires strong institutions and a systematic monitoring. We do patchy monitoring. We tend to be reactive in our approach. If something comes up, then we start talking about the Global Gender Gap Index and how badly Pakistan is doing, and then we forget about it. We don't develop a coordinated, well thought out strategy to tackle the various issues that have arisen in that area.
No, thank you for pointing that out. I think there's this gap between de jure and de facto, which is very important to fill, and that can be the catalyst that is needed to ensure that the progress in terms of reaching gender equality is amplified in the speed at which we're getting there. I'm sure a lot is being done. I mean, the work that you have done personally is testament to that as well. But broadly, if we look at the numbers, if we look at the socioeconomic landscape that exists, it still depicts a very, to some extent, a bleak and a gloomy picture. But on a more positive note, I think there's ample opportunity. If we look at from a micro lens, there's ample research which points to the fact that if there are greater women working for a company, the gender ratio is more balanced, that company tends to have a greater return on investment. Women in leadership positions tend, because of their both intellectual and emotional quotient, have the ability to maximize private sector gains. Additionally, if we're looking at from a macro lens, there's research that specific to Pakistan's GDP can increase by up to 30% if we're able to address or minimize the gaps that at the moment exist in terms of accessing economic opportunity. So, in terms of accessing opportunity, where do you see us going? What is the trajectory, and what do you envision? And if to say so, what more needs to be done to realize these goals and these results?
I can't give you a magic pill solution, but I feel like the one space that has been created and which is being very cleverly utilized by women is the digital space. I see actually remarkable utilization of that digital space in far-flung areas also, where women are using that space to promote their products, where they are using that space to access global markets also, and where they are learning, where they are networking. That is something that, except for that little problem of a language barrier, that is being very, very effectively utilized. So maybe one of the areas that needs to be used more effectively, and through the digital policy. Because Pakistan does have a decent digital policy, and if we just implement it in its letter and spirit, I think we'll be doing better. You see, we all know that women find it much easier to work from home. Mobility is a serious issue for women for various reasons. It's not just about the lack of say in decision making. It's also about resource issue. It's about home care responsibilities, which are because of which women choose not to step out, when they have little children. It's too much of and of course there's poor quality childcare available in Pakistan. So to counter all of that, utilization of the digital space effectively will be very, very important. Are we doing that? No, we are not really investing in women's STEM education. If you look at the women's enrollment in science, technology, engineering, and math areas, you'll find a significant disparity. The only area which we call sciences where girls are doing better than boys is medicine, as we all know. Yes, yeah. But in all other areas, there's enrollment and their participation is fairly low. That needs to be increased through incentivizing and through removing the even the social barriers that women face. I don't know if you've heard about it, but I've spoken with mothers. At least I remember one incident where a woman's daughter scored very well in math in a global contest. And she said that the first uh, the first response that came from some of the relatives was, what are you going to do with her? What is she going to do with this match? How is it going to help her as a woman as she grows up? So these are some of the things that through our discourse, through our education, we need to change. Another thing that I want to stress, women are concentrated in the textile and apparel sector, much like Bangladesh also, right? And that is where we are not investing in their upskilling. We put them into manual work. We are not upskilling them, putting them into the more sophisticated work where they're going to become redundant. They're only there for packaging. They're only there for doing the really entry-level manual work. So that's where the country needs to invest and leverage for faster gains.
And Bangladesh is a great use case example. I mean, we've seen Bangladesh really reap the gains, economic gains, by making sure that there's greater integration of women in economic activity. And like you pointed out, that textiles has been one of the key sectors which has enabled them to maximize their gains, and it's phenomenal. And the key lessons that we can learn from Bangladesh. Before we wrap up, I mean, just one last question for you. You served as an advisor to various boards, private sector organizations as well. And what do we see that in terms of the issues with agency, issues with legislative action, or the biases, the social norms that exist, there are certain supply side as well as demand side barriers that inhibit women's participation. And I'm talking more about the urban centers. Supply side would be, issues where women have asymmetric information, issues with mobility, etc. But on the demand side, based on a survey again that we did at the World Bank, we realized that some organizations, private sector firms, they tend to perceive women as more costly because of maternal benefits, because of healthcare, childcare, so on and so forth. So what would be your advice to these private sector organizations? How can they take more ownership of this issue? How can they improve their human resource protocols that can encourage women, enable women to be more active participants, women who do not have issues accessing employment at home? They don't face those social and cultural issues.
That is a problem that we have to contend with, because you see a lot of, first off, most of Pakistan's economic activity is in the informal sector. And the informal sector is in any case not complying with the legislation, whether it is labor legislation or social, on social matters also. So there, I don't think we'll be very successful in changes in the near future, unless one thing changes completely and we suddenly become a highly compliant society. The most structured employers, or the most structured organizations, yes, they find women more costly. One of the things that can be done is maybe incentivizing them. There could be tax cuts. They could. I know right now we can't afford any tax cuts and we might not be able to offer those, but there could be other incentives that could be provided to those organizations. They can just be a social incentive also, like recognition of those institutions. That translated into a better ranking of those institutions or organizations, for example. And then the state also has to subsidize these activities, because the state has to bear part of the cost in such situations. For example, what I would consider a successful example is the provision of daycare facilities for organizations where the government of Punjab provided a 30-70 sort of a solution to this daycare issue, where they said that if the organization provides for 30% of the cost, the government is going to provide for 70% of the cost and set up daycare centers. And a daycare center fund was established in 2012.
That is phenomenal.
And that was for public and private organizations. So that could be another possible solution. Similarly, yes, it was very useful. Another solution I feel is to link your TVET sector with a good, or rather to base the TVET sector activity on a good market analysis, because the vocational and training and all that happens, sometimes it is completely divorced of an assessment of what skills are required in that particular catchment area. And there cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. Different areas must have different trainings going on, and with strong linkages to industry over there, so that there is placement, immediate placement after that skills education empowerment. And women and men both do tend to go to these technical and vocational training institutes. Of course, the quality has to be improved also, but simple market analysis to make sure that that training is relevant to that particular geographic area would help.
I think these are some great solutions and very logical indeed. And I think it was very enlightening for me to know that the government of Punjab or the government of Pakistan has done these small interventions at various parts in history to address this. I would say this is very visionary and first world in some aspect, recognizing these gaps. And so in the end,
Sorry, I would like to give you a couple more examples. For example, there was a Fair Representation of Women Act passed in 2014, again in Punjab, which required every board, committee, and task force of the government of Punjab to have at least 33% women's representation. I was inducted into multiple boards because of that provision. Now 33% was a large number. People had to bring in people. And I have personally witnessed how mindset shifted within the first few meetings, when people realize that there are women who are interested in working and who might be able to deliver. And they then opens up doors for other women also. So that legislation was extremely helpful. There were policies to provide stipends for girls. These are all, and that we know of, but in terms of progressive legislation, these two are fairly useful examples.
Absolutely. And I think from what I've understood based on a discussion, that the issues is not because of lack of action towards addressing gender inequality, but it also is because of the broader landscape that exists in Pakistan. Things like informality, things of lack of capacity to implement monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, things like that, which are not gender specific, but these are some of the issues that we as a developing country tend to grapple with. And as long as we do not fix the entire house in order, get the entire house in order, these things would tend to exist, and we need a more holistic solutions actually. Thank you so much. And it was great to know not just about the gaps that exist, but also, some of the positives that have been done and undertaken, some action, some intent over the last few years or decades. Thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure.
It was my pleasure. And maybe we can do another show on harassment of women at the workplace, which is another big issue. And I'm happy to deal with it in a separate program.
Absolutely. I would love for you to come back. And the other issues, I would love to talk to you about access to finance, about harassment, about safety and security, which itself merit their own discussion. But for now, I think, Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that.